Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the big question in Washington, just where did COVID really come from?
Congressional Republicans trying to find out if COVID really did begin in a lab in China.
Discovering the origins is vital. It matters for the future of the world.
The latest evidence contradicting the longtime media narrative that COVID came from a lab was a conspiracy theory. Does the Asbury University revival signal a new great awakening on its way to America?
There's certainly a hunger for it. All signs are pointing that way.
During World War II, the family of Corrie Ten Boom saved hundreds of Jews and resistance workers in the Nazi-occupied Netherlands. Now, a new book tells the remarkable story of Corrie's heroism and faith.
It's all true, but it's structured exactly like a thriller, with cliffhangers, with misdirection, with missing information.
And Harvest Christian Fellowship pastor Greg Laurie tells the incredible story of how his adoptive father was not only saved, but healed. All those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
I want to begin this half hour in Washington as congressional Republicans have held their first hearing on a key question. Where did COVID come from? Witnesses arguing it could have easily come from a lab in China.
There is no smoking gun proving a laboratory origin hypothesis, but the growing body of circumstantial evidence suggests a gun that is, at very least, warm to the touch.
There are also questions whether some U.S. health officials actively tried to discredit the lab leak theory. CBN's Dale Hurd is on this story.
The Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic published emails Sunday in which Dr. Christian Anderson reportedly admits that Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, prompted him to write a scientific paper on the origins of COVID-19, with the goal of disproving the theory the virus escaped from a laboratory in China and instead may have come from a so-called wet market where exotic animals are sold.
The fundamental question is, why was Dr. Fauci so consumed with making sure the narrative wasn't about the lab? I think it's because they were doing gain-of-function research there. He didn't want that out.
The Energy Department and the FBI now believe the lab leak theory to be true. The mainstream media claim that the idea that COVID-19 originated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology had been debunked and was a conspiracy theory. Social media platforms labeled the lab leak theory misinformation and even censored it. Former CNN boss Jeff Zucker reportedly called the lab leak theory a Trump talking point and told reporters not to pursue it. The New York Times science reporter tweeted that the lab leak theory has racist roots. The Washington Post's Josh Rogan now admits the media suppressed the lab leak theory in part because of TDS, which stands for Trump derangement syndrome, opposing the lab leak theory simply because President Trump supported it. ABC's John Carl says the media now has egg on its face.
Look, some things may be true even if Donald Trump said them.
And we have the media and Democrats acting like defense attorneys for the Chinese instead of helping get to the bottom of what actually happened.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz has called for Dr. Anthony Fauci to face perjury charges for lying under oath to Congress about the origins of COVID-19. Ted Galen Carpenter writes that the media censorship of the lab leak theory has had serious fallout.
I think it should be an object lesson about the slippery slope of disinformation as a concept, how it can be used to stifle badly needed debates.
In a recent interview, Dr. Anthony Fauci said we may not ever know where the virus came from. Now more answers could be forthcoming after the Senate voted unanimously to declassify intelligence on COVID-19's origin. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Threats from China, including COVID, were also the topic of another hearing on Capitol Hill, where the consensus of top intelligence officials was China poses a serious safety and security threat to the United States. The hearing comes just a month after a Chinese spy balloon was shot down in U.S. airspace. Now, a bipartisan group of senators is pushing a bill to give the president greater authority to restrict technological foreign threats. CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson brings us the story from Washington.
One thing gaining bipartisan support in Washington right now, banning the incredibly popular Chinese-owned app called TikTok. In a hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee, top security officials testified as to why Chinese apps and software pose a growing national security threat.
This is not about TikTok. This is about any app, any electronics that are coming from China.
FBI Director Christopher Wray says TikTok screams out with national security concerns, explaining he believes the Chinese government could use it to drive narratives and divide Americans against each other.
Could they use TikTok to control data on millions of users?
Yes.
Could they use it to control the software on millions of devices given the opportunity to do so?
Yes.
Another hot topic is why the Intelligence Committee is divided on the origins of COVID-19.
Basically, there's a broad consensus in the intelligence community that the outbreak is not the result of a bioweapon or genetic engineering. What there isn't a consensus on is whether or not it's a lab leak, essentially as Director Wray indicated, or natural exposure to an infected animal.
Senator Susan Collins claims China's actions to hinder the investigation into the origin of the virus are not the actions of an innocent party.
I just don't understand why you continue to maintain on behalf of the intelligence community that these are two equally plausible explanations. They simply are not.
Senator James Lankford questioned Director Wray about a leaked memo warning of violent extremist Catholic ideology.
We do not and will not target people for religious beliefs, and we do not and will not monitor people's religious practices. That's not acceptable.
That is completely not acceptable.
Lankford added he wasn't surprised to see the source of the memo was a Southern Poverty Law Center.
But for whatever reason, the FBI continues to be able to count on them for who's the listing of a hate group. They have a long history of having anti-Christian bias.
Author Gordon Chang spoke with CBN News' Faith Nation about the growing tension between the U.S. and China and why he believes a war is coming to American soil.
We have a lot of Chinese-made devices in our country, like the drones. And then, if all of that weren't bad enough, we have these big cranes, port cranes, that are meant to be connected to China so China can troubleshoot them, which means that they can then manipulate them and steal data. China can do what's obvious, and that is, in the first moments of a war, manipulate our infrastructure, take it down, the grid, water, all the rest of it.
This week, the White House announced they support a bipartisan bill that would give the president the power to ban foreign-based technologies like TikTok, which currently has over 100 million American users. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Coming up, what will be the impact of the Asbury revival that's spreading across America? Will it lead to another great awakening? We're going to hear from one Christian author who says it looks like it will when we come back. The Asbury revival is spreading to college campuses and churches across the country. So the question is America on the verge of another great spiritual awakening? On this week's episode of The Global Lane, Christian author Mark Burrell says all signs are pointing in that direction.
There's certainly a hunger for it. A lot of us have been praying for revival in America for a while. And as the cultural decline takes place, as things get worse, it's very natural for there to be a turning back to God. And so I look at that. I also look at the Jesus Revolution, and we didn't talk about this, but the film just came out. I went and saw it last week. I was growing up in the 70s when that occurred. And if you look back over history, if you look at the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening that happened in the 1730s, 40s, and 50s, and the second was in the early 1800s, what you tend to see is about 30 or 40 years later, something big happens. And so, of course, in the case of the First Great Awakening, it was the American founding, which was huge. In the case of the Second Great Awakening, it was abolishing slavery, which was equally as huge. And right now, if you're a Christian, you have a Christian worldview, and you're looking at what's happening in America, you're praying for a return back to the principles that this nation was founded on, which is going to be a big deal for us to work through as a nation. which is why I wrote the book, incidentally, to help address that.
I know widespread revival, great awakenings always lead to social change. Now, in your book, you discuss the American Christians have become stagnated in their faith. Others are indifferent about God and Christ. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the book is about really solidifying our citizenship duty that Christians have. And incidentally, this is our duty no matter where we live. It's not just an American thing. What I did with the book is I went through the Bible. I had questions myself about the legitimacy of the founding. Was it really justifiable? If Jesus said you should pay your taxes and the colonists didn't want to pay their taxes, was that really biblically justifiable? So I went through the Bible and did an exhaustive study, just looking at all the verses that had to do with nations and rights and justice and governing. And Gary, I was flabbergasted at all the information I found. And as I lined it up, starting in the Old Testament, actually starting back in Genesis 9, you learned that we really have a citizenship responsibility to step forward and lead in the area of civil government, which is completely contrary to what the modern evangelical church says. Their basic theological position is submit and pray. No matter what, just submit and pray, which is, of course, they get that from Romans 13 and from 2 Timothy 1. But that's not where we first learn about our citizenship duty. We learn all about that in the Old Testament. And so that's what I do in the book. I lay it all out. I address all these objections. And then more importantly, I show how in America, what makes America truly unique is our Declaration of Independence, which I assert is our national founding covenant, which we need to get back to and discuss as a nation, because it really is what defines us.
Why is it important that we understand the meaning of these documents and our Judeo-Christian roots as a nation? Seems like we're forgetting that.
Yeah, that's the whole reason for the title, right? Rediscovering the American Covenant. So it's critical, first, as Christians living out our faith. I maintain if you want to aspire to be a mature believer, then you should be involved in governing in your local community, in your state, and in the nation where you live. That is part of living out your faith. And I lay that out. I describe what that looks like. It doesn't mean that we're all going to political rallies and doing these things, but it does mean that we have a responsibility to vote for people who believe in our national founding covenant, the idea that there is a law of nature and of nature's God, which is a description of the moral law that comes right from the Bible, the idea that our rights come from God, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is really our citizenship duty. And that's the argument that I make. And my target audience for the book primarily are mature believers, pastors who are looking for a really strong biblical argument for why we are responsible for civil government. So that's the target audience of the book. And I'm hoping to engage in a national conversation eventually about our national identity, which comes from the Declaration of Independence.
Well, this may be the best time. The book is Rediscovering the American Covenant, Roadmap to Restore America. Mark Burrell, thank you for setting us straight today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary.
Also on the global lane, persecution against Christians is rising in China, and a pastor is arrested in Myanmar. We're going to talk to former Religious Freedom Ambassador Sam Brownback. And in Great Britain, the Church of England teaches 4-year-olds about gender fluidity. You can see the global lane this evening on the CBN News channel. It begins at 8:30 Eastern. You can watch it on the CBN News app or YouTube as well. Still ahead, she was a hero of the Holocaust. Corrie Ten Boom saved the lives of 800 Jews and resistance workers. We're going to look at how a new biography brings the daring exploits of the watchmaker's daughter to light right after this. During World War II, the Ten Boom family saved hundreds of Jews and resistance workers in the Nazi-occupied Netherlands. Many books have been written about Corrie Ten Boom and her family's courage. The latest book is called The Watchmaker's Daughter, and it reads like an action thriller. CBN's Jenna Browder spoke with the author about Corrie's remarkable heroism and extraordinary faith.
During World War II, it's estimated Corrie Ten Boom saved the lives of some 800 Jews and resistance workers, many of them staying with her and her family in their watch shop and home. Their lives were on the line every day, and that's the tension and drama captured on these pages.
It's all true, but it's structured exactly like a thriller with cliffhangers, with misdirection, with missing information.
The Watchmaker's Daughter by Larry Loftis, a nonfiction thriller that tells the story of Corrie, her family, and their remarkable resistance against the Nazis.
The Gestapo is after everybody. They're after the Jews. They're after the Dutch divers. They're after the Dutch resistance, all the people that are helping them. They're crashing down doors in the middle of the night.
Loftis, who spent days digging through the Ten Boom archives at Wheaton College, includes the story of one particularly tense lunch. Jews and resistance workers all gathered around the table when someone appears at the window.
And they're like, what? And one of the resistance guys there says, okay, nobody move, but there's a guy peering through the window who's sort of cleaning the window, but he's looking through the curtains. And Betsy, Corrie's sister, says, well, I didn't order the windows cleaned. And then someone else says, there's no ledge. There's no ledge on this. How is he looking at it? There's no ledge. And the resistance guy says, he's on a ladder. And so everybody's like frozen. And so one of the key people in the story, Yussi, who is a Jew, says, okay, look, everybody just continue on like normal. In a few minutes, we're going to sing happy birthday.
Just part of everyday life, although getting caught could be a capital offense, punishable by death.
So that kind of drama, that kind of tension is throughout the story. So it could be a German military truck that parks right in front of their house one night. And they're like, everybody rushes into the hiding place. And so it's just on and on.
A young Dutchman named Hans Pulley brought the family into the resistance. He was hiding with the Ten Booms, a so-called Dutch diver. When Corrie found out he was part of the resistance, she wanted to help.
Let's use the house as the headquarters. So you feel free. Tell me what I need to do, and we'll use this as our headquarters.
So the Ten Booms hired an architect to build a hiding place behind a secret wall. When the Germans would come by to sweep the home and watch shop, that's where the Jews and Dutch divers would hide. Throughout it all, deep Christian faith served as the Ten Booms' motivation, starting with Corrie's father.
Casper, who was Corrie's father, was an absolute spiritual giant. And he was a giant because his father was Corrie's grandfather, and then the great-grandfather.
And it was their faith that led them to love the Jewish people.
He was really gentle and just loved people. And so he would see the German police arresting somebody, and Corrie's like, oh, those poor people. And Casper's like, yeah, they touched the apple of God's eye. And she's like, what? He's worried about the Germans, how messed up they are spiritually, that they're spiritually barren. And that's just him.
Loftis says Corrie's life can be summed up by the Reformation Creed. After darkness, light.
She went through absolute darkness, absolute hell, as did Casper, as did Betsy, as did Willem, as did the other people in the story. They're all in concentration camps or prisons. But she always, the whole family, they found light.
And without giving too much away, by the end of the war, there was a lot Corrie could be angry about. But instead of resentment, she chose grace. And that became another part of her incredible legacy. It's all included in the book. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Coming up, Harvest Fellowship pastor Greg Laurie tells the incredible story of his adoptive father's salvation and how he was healed. We're going to have that for you when we come back. Stay with us, please. Pastor Greg Laurie is revealing a stunning and miraculous testimony about how he eventually found his adoptive dad and what happened next. Laurie, whose story is part of the new movie Jesus Revolution, pastors the Christian Harvest Fellowship Church in California with 15,000 members. The story is not told in the film, but he was able to eventually track down his adoptive father, Oscar Laurie, in New Jersey. Greg shared the gospel with him at dinner. His father, an attorney and an intellectual, listened intently. But he didn't say much. He asked Greg to go for a walk early the next morning, and he tells what happened then.
My dad says, Greg, I listened very carefully to what you said last night about Jesus. I said, right. And he said, I want to accept Jesus Christ into my life right now. Boy, did I wake up fast. I said, what? He says, yes, I want to accept Jesus Christ right now. I said, well, Dad, let me go over it one more time, okay? So I went over the whole thing again. He says, yes, I want to accept Jesus Christ right now. What do I need to do? I said, well, we need to pray. Now, remember, we're walking the whole time. We're walking through a park. He drops to his knees. Now, I wasn't going to drop to my knees, but since he did, I did too. So we're on our knees, and I lead him in this prayer to ask Christ to come into his life. It was incredible. One of the most amazing conversions I've ever seen. Right after we prayed, he said, Greg, pray for my heart. Pray God heals my heart. I said, well, I don't know if God will heal your heart, but we can pray. So we pray for him to be healed. After we're done praying, he says, Greg, my doctor is not far from here. His office is right over there. Let's go see him. I want to tell him my heart is healed. I said, Dad, we don't know if your heart's healed. Well, let's go see my doctor. So we go into his doctor's office, a nice Jewish man, and he says to the doctor, Doc, this is my son, Greg, from California. He's a preacher, and I just prayed and asked Jesus to come into my life, and my heart is healed. I'm thinking, oy vey, what is this doctor thinking? The doctor says, now ask her. We don't know about that. We have to run some tests on you first. They ran tests on my father. The heart condition that he had was gone. God had actually healed him.
Now you can learn more about this amazing story at cbnnews.com. Time now for your Thursday Thankfulness. Today, I hope you will join me in this prayer of gratitude. God, thank you for being good. You are good in the morning. You are good in the evening. You are always good. And to that prayer, we say, amen and amen. Be sure to make this a Thursday filled with gratitude. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right back here next time. Again, make it a thankful Thursday and join us right back here tomorrow at the very same time. Goodbye, God bless, and thank you so much for watching.